Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to the stream. I'm Tyler. Good to see you guys again. Thanks for joining in. Let's do some more art today, shall we? Now, just a disclaimer here. I don't know if you guys know, but I'm in California. We've had a ton of wildfires here, and I've got asthma, so my lungs have been a little messed up lately. So we're going to see how this goes. Hopefully we can get through this whole stream here without any issues. We've got some nice hot ginger tea with me here to help me out. Oh, that's good. You guys like tea? I'm a tea drinker myself. But I gotta stick to the herbals because that caffeine, man, I'm a insomniac too, so I gotta be careful about that. But anyway, enough rambling. Let's get to the topic at hand here, which is a continuation of rendering in logical layers. So last time, if you guys were here on Monday, we started work on a statue demo where we were talking about approaching your Photoshop document in a way where the layers correspond with the different aspects that make up a visual render, right? Like the lighting and the different kinds of elements that make up the lighting, and structuring your file to reflect that instead of having just sort of arbitrary layer chaos. You want to try to avoid the layer chaos. It's not a good thing. So let's walk through real quickly what we've already done, and then we'll dive into the next section. So we started with some quick under drawings here, a couple variations, really subtle. Ended up going with number 2. Then we progressed to a more clean line art of the design. So that's basically just taking our under drawing and lowering its opacity, and then doing a final line on top. Then we filled in the whole shape with a base value. We're using a light value here so we can do the next step easily, which is bringing in the shadows. We want to be able to see that stuff really clearly. So if we had a dark value here, that stuff would be harder to see. So that's why we've chosen the slider value here. And now in this step here, you can see that we've identified the direction of our light source. And we have all of our shadows starting to come in here. Now this is what I call the graphic shadows pass, which is a combination of the form and cast shadows. So here we've got in the upper left our 3 types of shadows listed out. This graphic shadows pass is these first 2. And then this third kind of shadow here, the ambient occlusion, comes in on the next phase. So if you guys want some more in-depth explanation of those passes, just feel free to go back and watch the last stream, which will be, of course, uploaded to YouTube, so you can check that out. But now we're going to go into this next part here, which is basically figuring out our local values and starting to center in on the color choices and the materials. And so going into this, I kind of thought about a stone statue with some metal accents of some kind. And so here we're going to have stone with some gold accents, the crown elements, part of the base, the necklace there, and the placard will be gold, and then the rest of this is going to be stone. So we've got to separate those right now and determine how they're going to look in terms of local value and color. So we'll do that. And of course, this is going to be a new layer. So we'll just call it stone, and we're going to put it in a group called local colors. And we can use our overall statue silhouettes selection as a mask for this new layer, because we're not going to be painting anything outside of that, right? We want to make use of that as a nice way to stay in the lines. Let's get a nice simple flat brush here, and the nice thing about this process is we don't have to be perfect right away. We can kind of change our mind later. But I'm going to go for a cooler stone color with the idea that it'll complement the warmer gold tones well. We'll see how it goes. Mauricio asks, will you add some color variation later in the process? Yes, indeed we will. That's definitely going to come into play here for sure. It's going to come later. It's going to come kind of toward the end. Well, I guess when I say the end, I don't know that it's necessarily the chronological end. You can kind of go on forever at the very last stage there, polishing and tweaking. But toward the end of our sort of structured, layered process here. Because at some point we're going to merge all this down and just kind of paint raw on it. Hey, Mountain Man, glad to see you again. Yeah, sure, go ahead and let me know what your question is. I'll try to answer as best as I can. Right, we almost got this one blocked in. The other cool thing about thinking graphically like this is you'll notice that we could actually omit the blending step and leave this in sort of a stylized fashion, right? This could be sort of a stylized render in terms of the lighting being simpler. It almost has kind of a cel shaded look to it, which is kind of neat. So that could be a decision you can make during this process. So Madman asks about preparing for a CGS course, and you're going to go into the game design diploma course. So, one of the things that I think CGS does well is it makes sure that mentors are really acquainted with their particular curriculums. We spend a lot of time getting familiar with them and trying to be experts at them. And, one of the cons of that is that we're not familiar with the other programs' curriculums, right? So the game design curriculum I'm not familiar with. So I wouldn't be able to speak to the specific skills that it's asking you to have before going into that program. So that's going to be better as an email to our admin or speaking to one of our game design mentors. But I can certainly speak to the any of the concept art courses here at the school. Okay, so we've got this blue in here. We can see it's a really strong blue. We're not going to stick with this blue. We're probably going to desaturate it a bit, maybe change the brightness. But we have it as a mask now. In addition to the mask we have on the whole object, we have now this mask for the stone area. And we can use the inverse of that to easily paint all of the rest of the object. So we'll select everything with our original mask. And then by holding Control and Alt, you can see that we get a little minus sign. It's really hard to see. You guys might not be able to see this, but we get the minus sign on the selection when we hit the Alt key, and then we can subtract what we've just painted with this stone area, create a new layer called gold, and use our current selection now as a mask for this new color. And this one becomes super easy because it's basically everything that's left. And there we go. There's two sort of local values / colors of our object. And because of the way that we've structured these lighting layers, it's interacting with these new choices we've made, because these shadows are multiplying on top here. Actually, we're going to set this to multiply. Make sure all of your shadow layers are set to multiply here. And we can even put these into a group called shadows. So there's our shadows coming in. And now we can tune these local value / colors to our liking. So let's see here. Okay, that's kind of interesting. You can go really light with it, like a white marbly kind of quality, or you can go darker. I think I like darker here because the gold is going to get a bit bright on us. So I think that's have a nice region to be living in there. Okay, I like how this is coming along so far. Okay, next steps here. Block in a bit of the environment just to start to get the scene feeling a bit more real. And when you're doing this, you want to think about the lighting. That's really all that's happening here, is just thinking logically about where's the light hitting. And we've determined that very early on. And the environment has to agree with those choices. So we're going to bring in some of this lighting in the front here. I'm just using a soft brush and a selection region to keep it away from the back of the image here. And then we can play with how bright we want that to be. And now let's enhance the sense of light by bringing in some darkness in the background here. It's a very, very simple setup. If you guys can think of when they do very simple portrait photography, they have their little setup with their backdrop, and you got your little chair, and I mean, that's basically what we're doing, right? This is a very simple studio lighting setup, and it's nothing complicated. And when you're doing this whole thing, best to think about one light at a time. That's really critical. You can see that if we were to bring in multiple lights, all these choices would become exponentially more difficult to make. So go one light at a time, and you can add more lights later easily. So yeah, just consider that as you're blocking things in. Let's add a cast shadow now from the whole object onto the ground. And I'm going to just kind of approximate what's going on here. We just need some kind of a shape. We don't really need it to be super crazy accurate. And the darkness of this shadow here is based on how much ambient light is in the scene. And you're going to want to match this intensity of this shadow to the intensity of the shadows on your object. Generally, they're all in the same world together, right? So the amount of ambient light hitting everything is the same. So if we had this cast shadow from the object really dark, and then the shadows on the object itself were light, that would feel strangely disjointed. They wouldn't feel like they were living in the same scene as each other. So we're going to try to match those. And just like the ambient occlusion on the object, we have a bit of ambient occlusion here right between the object and the ground. So we'll bring that in. And we'll be subtle. Let's turn off our cage, because we don't really need that blue cage anymore. Merge those together. Let's carve this shape a bit cleaner. I'm going to have a bit of dissipation in this shadow as it gets further out. Okay, we're going to turn off that original local value we had, because we now have these color choices we're working with. That's basically, they're doing the same thing, right? So we only need one of the two. And we've turned off the lines now. There's no more lines in this piece, and you can see that everything reads just fine without the lines, which is, if you're going for that painterly realistic look, obviously we don't want to have lines in the piece. So it's good to see that we're already getting a strong read without relying on those. And I have a lot of students tell me that they struggle with making a piece look good without the lines. It's like the moment they turn the lines off, the piece starts to look, well, not like they want. And the reason that happens is because they don't have clear shadow definition, and they're not thinking about the ambient occlusion, right? The lines, as we talked about in the last session, are in many ways suggesting ambient occlusion. They're in those tightest crevices. They're the darkest parts of the piece. We get rid of those, and we're missing those shadows, right? If we have go with the music analogy here, we're missing the bass notes of the image. Those are critical. Okay, so we've got this cast shadow in here. And now I'm just kind of looking at everything and evaluating, is the shadows feeling good? Do I need to make any tweaks to that before we move on to the next phase? missing this little cheek spot here. Needed a bit more AO. Okay, I think that's looking good. Let's go ahead and duplicate into a new group now, because this is sort of transitioning to the next stage of the image. So to recap here, we had this one, then we went to this one, and now we're going to go to the next stage here, which is going to be all the halftones. So this is where we start to blend things, right? We get the gradations of values. And when you're doing this step, it's important to retain the clarity between the highlights and shadows that you have at this phase. That's the reason we do this graphical step, is so that we have a very clear sense of the light and the shadow. When we're blending these halftones, we want to try to maintain the groups of values in the light versus the groups of values in the shadows. Those should be distinctly different. And sometimes there's a habit of, when we make the halftones, there's a habit of sort of linearly blending between the light and shadow, right? If we think about it as a linear scale, it's like we go from dark to light in even increments. That's not the right way you want to go, because that linear blending creates muddy lights, right? We don't get that clean graphic difference between the two. It's not realistic, right? So we have to think about how the lighting works in real life, and it gets a bit sciencey, but not to go too deep into it, but we're basically talking about these lighting formulas that a guy named Lambert came up with a long time ago. And he observed how there's sort of a like a cosine fall off to the light, where it transitions from light to darkness in a non-linear way. So we've got to think a little bit about that as we're blending. In its simplest form, just remember, don't go with a even linear gradation from light to dark. You've got to obey those two distinct groups. Okay, so with that in mind, let's go to our graphic shadows pass here and blend in on some of the forms that we feel like are rounded. So this neck here is going to be a rounded form. And I'm just using a smudge soft tool to blend this area. Actually, let's real quick before we do that, let's merge this with our halftones, because we don't want those to be different. We want them to be together. So I'm going to take this back to normal mode here. Put it on 100% here. Let's see, we've got merge that in, set that to multiply again, pop this down. Okay, great. Now let's go ahead and blend this. We're getting a separate edge there from one of our early halftones. So make sure you've got all that together. And you can see that we're blending this stuff, but we're keeping it as distinct groups. I'm gonna have rounding here on this shape. And you're thinking about the edge quality too here, like, how sharp is the transition of these forms. These here are more planar in their transition, so I'm going to be blurring them less. Blurring them is kind of not a great term to use. I'm blending them a little bit less there. Oh, thanks, Dennis. Glad you're enjoying it. Good luck with your rigging practice there. That's a very, very technical process, and kudos for mastering that process there. It's a tricky one. So while we're in this step 2, we're thinking about the difference between a core or a form shadow and a cast shadow. So the cast shadows are being formed by the objects blocking the light, casting their shape down on something nearby. Form shadows are things rolling off as they go away from the light. The cast shadows are going to have a harder edge to them. But interestingly enough, with this piece, we've gone with this kind of a planar design. It's sort of geometric in nature, and so there aren't a lot of smooth transitions here. And actually, that might have been sort of an oversight from me in terms of how to demonstrate this process well. I was thinking simple and stylized, and didn't even think about the fact that the planar quality of this doesn't allow us to demonstrate as many smooth transitions, but yeah, we'll work through it here. We're going to smooth this one out. Yeah, I think we'll go smooth this one as well. That stone a bit darker. I'm bringing in some of the halftones here that suggest some of the rounding of the forms and the more subtle planar transitions. We could turn on our lines again to see where we were thinking those would happen. Again, just remember as you're adding these halftones, don't destroy that graphical quality that you had. Dividing the light and shadow up. Forgot to blend our eyes there. That would have been tragic. Save your work, save often. If you guys are working out there, save what you're doing. Get a little bit of rounding to this bottom edge here. Keep playing around with the local value of this stone here. Just want to make sure that that gold has a nice pop to it. Okay, yeah, that's working good. Let's soften some of these shadows. This is a cast shadow coming from that beard down onto the neck, so we don't want to soften that too much. We're trying to just get to a point where we have enough clarity on the image and where it's headed. You get enough confidence in that where we can start to merge things and just paint right on top. We're not too far away from that step. Got to sort of paint like a sculptor, you know, as you're adding shadows and highlights and stuff, you're pushing and pulling forms like you're sculpting, right? You know, it's like your fingers are in the clay and you're moving the shapes around. Every choice you make, every stroke that you put on the painting is a form choice like that. Marsupial asks, is this one of my characters? I guess you could say it is one of my characters. I don't know that there's a whole lot of story behind this, just a fairly simple kind of character, kind of kingly, you know, ancient-looking character, just for the purposes of the demo here. So not a whole lot of thought in the backstory here. You know, this demonstration is mostly about rendering. This is not about design. So you know, we can maybe have another demonstration talking about design. It's a whole nother category, but a very important one. Okay, let's soften few other shadows here. And then we might just dip into our highlights soon. You know what I want to do is I want to get a bit of definition between the front and side of these medallions. I'm going to bring that local value down on the gold because when we add the highlights, I want there to be a nice difference between the base value we've chosen and the shiny parts, basically. Now we can start talking about highlights. So highlights, what's there to say about highlights? Well, it's easy to get confused between the lit part of the form and the reflection of the light. They're different things, and the lit part of the form is dictated by where the light is hitting, right? But the reflectivity, or like the shiny bits, right, that is affected by our viewing angle. And it can feel a little complicated, I realize, but the main thing to remember is they're two separate elements. And one of the nice things about this particular process is that a lot of the core light, not the reflective part, but basically the lit side of the object, is defined by the lack of shadow, right? Like, so we have the area we painted shadow in, and then the area that there isn't shadow. We're sort of getting that core light for free. The reflectivity is what we haven't added yet, and that'll be in another step. But I do like to bring in a bit of fall off from the light, a bit of kind of global fall off from the light before we start adding the specular reflectivity. So I'm going to take this into a new group here. And now on top of the local colors, we're going to do an overlay layer. Generally, I like shadows to be on multiply layers and highlights to be on overlay layers. It's just my first go-to. It's not what I always use, but if you guys are sort of just like fishing for a first stab at it, that's generally a good place to start. I'm just starting adding a bit of intensity to the main light here. And in the way we're applying it, it's creating some natural fall off to the light. So we can see here that's adding a bit of intensity to that section. And it ends up, if we apply it globally like this on top of the shadows too, or, you know, it's brightening the core value there. What's kind of nice is that it brightens some of these areas here where we would get a bit more reflected light hitting in these shadows and kind of brightening those shadows up a bit. So it ends up kind of just naturally working for us in multiple ways. And you could go in and just adjust based on how bright you want this light to be. And zoom out, evaluate. Remember, you can erase, bring it back down a bit. Okay. So we can see here a quick progression of where we were at before. So see that kind of coming together there. You guys are having some fun in the chat there talking about international travel, is it? Sorry, I haven't been keeping up. All right. We're going to do a new layer now and start to explore some of these highlights. We're going to do the gold first. And I'm going to use a color dodge layer for that. And when you use a color dodge layer, you want to go into the layer style options. And you want to turn off these two checkboxes here, because these, when they're turned on, cause the color dodge to interact in a way with the layers below, unlike it would interact if you were to paint directly on a flattened layer. So I want a kind of a predictable result there. So we're going to turn those off. And I'm going to use my gold mask to mask this new layer. We'll call this, actually, let's put this in a group. We'll call this highlights. This is going to be gold. And why are we using a color dodge layer? Well, I'm sure a lot of you know that a color dodge brush or color dodge layer is a really awesome blending mode. Very, very popular for good reason. You know, it makes things pop and works great for lighting and glowing things and all that. And people, you know, it's eye candy. But what is it doing? Well, color dodge, what it does is it amplifies the value and the saturation. It keeps the color intense as it brightens, and there's a richness in that, right? And whereas something like a screen layer, where we're just adding a you know, whatever the kind of natural value of the light is, we're just adding this. If we have a white light, we're sort of adding white, and it can have a desaturating quality as we brighten. So color dodge keeps that color richness as we increase the value. Now when we're doing metallic surfaces, it is particularly useful to use color dodge, and I'll explain why. So in real life, in the real world, materials all look different for scientific reasons. You know, the materials, they behave differently when the light hits them. I don't want to get into the science too much here, but essentially metallic conductive surfaces, when the light waves hit those surfaces, the object absorbs some of the light waves, and only certain light waves emit back out. And the end result is that those highlights, those reflective bits that we see, are tinted by, well, it seems as though they're tinted by the color of the metal itself, the conductive surface itself. So for instance, a gold material has kind of a gold colored highlight, whereas a surface that isn't conductive, the waves are reflecting back at us differently, right? They're not getting absorbed in the way that is happening with surfaces like gold. And the color of those reflections are going to be essentially the color of whatever the light is that's hitting it. So if a white light hits skin, for example, the light bouncing back at us is going to be white. If a red light is hitting the skin, we're going to see a red light. But these metallic surfaces, the light that hits it is going to get absorbed partially, and then we're going to see that light coming back as a tinted color. So the color dodge, what it is we're going to intensify the brightness, but we're also going to keep the color of that yellow of the gold in that highlight, so it feels very accurate to metallic specularity. So let's get a good brush to use here. Let's see, maybe we'll just use a soft brush. Well, yeah, let's start with this for now. Little goes a long way with this stuff too, so. And you're gonna want to kind of play with this and see what feels right. And it also, you have to make a determination. What is the type of gold, right? Is it a polished gold? Is it like an ancient gold? Is it pitted and messed up? Is there any kind of rust or oxidation happening? That's things you need to consider as you're bringing this in, because the highlights are going to be affected by that choice. But here we're not going to do, I don't want to do a chromed out, polished looking gold, because I want this to feel kind of like an ancient object. So we're going to have a bit more of a natural quality. And I'm just considering the light source here, and I'm adding a bit of extra intensity to the edges, which is sort of a little cheap hack to give dimension to this and suggest a bit of that age and wear. And again, we've got our own layer here, so we can play around with how much we have of this. If it gets too heavy on us too quick, easy to just pop it all down. And we haven't brought in any color mixing yet, so we're still kind of in what I call coloring book mode, right, where everything is sort of one color. But we'll resolve that. Don't worry, we'll get in there and resolve it. It'll look good. And also, don't worry too much about getting these reflective angles correct. No one's going to be coming in here with scientific tools and measuring your art. It's just got to feel right. You've got to just think about readability, the shapes, getting those shapes to read right. I feel like maybe there's some weird little bits of reflection kind of dancing through the surface here. Why not? I mean, it's not super polished, but maybe we'll get a few of those things hitting. The more grain is on the surface of an object, the more diffused those reflections become, the more blurry, the harder it is for you to see what's actually in the environment. So these little kind of diagonal lines of light that I'm putting in here, they're very kind of abstract, because I don't want this surface to feel very shiny, like mirror-like. We're not going to get a sense of what the environment is by looking at the surface here. And I'm using a brush that's it's kind of like a fine round brush. It's got some shape dynamics to it, of course, some opacity jitter there. So I'm getting more fine control over this, but we can go in with a simple big round soft brush and amplify these highlights quite a bit if we want to. Gives it a bit of radiance as the highlight seems to cause light to emit off of it. This is sort of almost like a lens effect, but it's pretty cool. And I mean, we go crazy with this, right? Like if we wanted a really hot, crazy brush, we could go in here with 50%, right? And we can get super intense, and we can do that later if we want to, right? It's not to say we can't do that. I tend to sneak up on things. Okay, that's working. Now let's bring some extra highlights into the stonework, and so there we're not going to use a color dodge layer because stone is not conductive, so we're not going to have the blue of the core stone coming through. We're going to have just basic white light coming off. And use a plain old normal layer for this, or an overlay would also be appropriate. We might toggle between the two just to see how it's looking. I'm actually going to start with a normal layer. This is a bit of a weathering pass too. It's not just highlights. We're going to try to imply just a bit of texture while we're doing this too. And what you guys will notice is as we get further along in the process, the rigidity of the layers starts to become a bit more organic, right? We start to do a bit more with each pass, and it's because our clarity increases. The confidence grows and we can be a bit more freeform about our choices. Maybe you can even add extra planes into the design if you didn't think that they were present enough originally. Why not add them at this stage? All right, thanks for stopping by, Mountain Man. See you next time. Try to be careful about the edging here, getting into the shadows and looking kind of dirty. Just try to have some precision as you're doing this. let's see how we're doing here. So this is the layer before and now after. And we'll turn down the intensity of this just a bit. Okay, that works. If you guys have ever painted miniatures before, you'll know about this concept of dry brushing. And it's kind of brings out the edges, right? It kind of hits the edges of the form, brings them out, suggests a bit of wear and age. And it's a bit of what inspires me to do this pass here. You can see that we're not losing a sense of that original lighting pass we did. Just kind of sculpting, you know, just pushing and pulling some forms around, seeing what happens. There should be a relaxing quality to this process because you have a good sense of what's going on. There's less mystery to be solved. It's the unknown that makes you tense. Hey, thanks, Pigeons. Let's see, did I use a simple overlay layer for the colors? So the way that that works is all of our shadows are on top and they're all set to multiply. So we can put those local color choices underneath the shadows as a simple normal layer. So we turn the local colors off, we can see that that's a gray version of our statue, and then we can turn those on there underneath and yeah, we can kind of manipulate and play with those as we want. That's kind of a fun way to check your values too, right? Is just kind of look at stuff without those local colors and stuff affecting things. Huh. Actually, let me... Kind of bothers me that the cast shadow is inside that shape there. I don't know. It's not like it really matters, but let's just remove that. Yeah, there we go. Cool. So, and then here's our highlights. Right, getting some interesting highlights coming in. Now how cool that is, we can play around with the color of the statue there. Like, what does it look like? It's more pink, right? It looks really bizarre, but it's kind of interesting. Bring the saturation down. What if we make it very dark? And if we did a really dark statue like this, we could change the style of the highlights and make it like an obsidian, right? And that could be another option to go with there. Make it very light. Gives a totally different feel. All right, so let's look at, we've started to add some of those highlights and we'll continue to work those in. In fact, I say that and I immediately find something I want to kind of tinker with. Let's add a bit of this edge into this section here. This is going to be that damage pass where we're starting to add texture, and the damage pass will get more intense too in a sec. As we merge these together, I'll be able to go in and kind of bash it around and add more damage. But let's add a little bit of variation to the stone underneath everything. Okay, so here I'm just going to take a brush that's got some texture to it, and we'll go real light with this layer. And I'm going to add, let's see here, we'll go brush. I'm going to turn on color dynamics here. And we'll do some hue and saturation jitter. Let's turn this all the way up so we can see what's happening here. Brightness jitter. Okay, let's see. We can see it doesn't get a really strong result if we turn this up too much. Will I add reflections in another pass? Well, so reflections, as you mean the light as it's bouncing here facing us, or do you mean like bounced light from the environment? Because we've done some of the reflections already here. There's nothing in the scene that is super reflective, right? So we're not going to have those mirror-like reflections happening. But bounce light we're going to add later. That's going to be a step coming up here. Soften this cast shadow. It's distracting me now. Oh, you know what? Let's just use the smudge tool to do that. And that's something you're going to notice too is as the piece becomes more realistic, then you'll find other areas that need attention, right? You kind of have to work everything up together. Go a little darker with that. All right, so I think we can progress now to the next phase. We'll make this 0.8. As I mentioned before, this is going to be, I'll try to make an edited video of this in a condensed way with the more structured narration. And so I'm trying to make the layers organized for the demonstration, but also for myself later in editing. Okay, so I have a pretty good idea now where this is going. I'm feeling fairly confident about my choices. I think it's time to abandon the layer structure here and just start to kind of paint raw on everything. And again, that's something that you guys can do whenever you're feeling comfortable with the piece. You can take that plunge. So I'm just doing a bit of cleanup here. Merge all this into our background layer. Delete our notes, get rid of our lines, get rid of our light source indicator. And there it is, just one single object now, all together as one. Nice and clean. And I'm just crazy for detail. I love getting in here and noodling, so this is one of my favorite steps. finding all kinds of fun opportunities to add these little extra bits. And now that things are merged together too, if you see something you want to kind of tweak a little bit, liquefy is really easy to do at this stage, right? We can mess with that lip shape. It's feeling a little weird to me. Super easy fix. And now when you're looking to add extra color variation and a bit of vibrance to the image, I recommend going in and using the color picker set to the lab mode. It's a weird mode, originally created not for this purpose, but it happens to work really well to where we can sample a color in the image, and using these A and B sliders, we can just nudge them to get the color to be more expressive in whatever direction we're intending, but it'll be a relative change, so it stays sort of homogeneous with what's going on. Versus trying to pick a color arbitrarily out of a palette can be difficult. So here, if we click this here and we switch it over a little more to blue, we're adding more blue, but it's jiving with what's there on the canvas already. And you can use these subtle hue transitions to help us feel form change, like planar change here. Or just add interest, right? Change the sense of focal points. Keep wondering if I want to have another plane suggested here subtly, but I don't think. Let's see, do I like that? Yeah. Let's do, well, let's do it real subtle. Let's just imply. Just a slight shift there. I might keep that, I might get rid of it. We'll see. Adding a bit of relative grays to this gold so that the gold parts just feel even more rich. And remember the concept of balanced light too, and that as the light is bouncing, colors are also reflecting, so we can justify having blue in the gold and gold in the blue, right? They're all part of the same scene. And the nature of bounce light gives us plenty of reason to have that happening where we want. When you add bounce light, you got to be careful again that you don't go too bright with it. Color can be a safer thing to play with. Hue transition can be a safer thing to play with when you're adding bounce light than heavy value change. This is going back to that light and dark value groups that we established. We don't want to disrupt that. You can see in this step 2 is a good step to do cleanup. Just kind of tighten everything up. Get these edges all nice and polished. And maybe some areas of the stone are a bit more polished. Maybe they're a bit smoother, so we're going to get a bit more intensity to the highlight. I think that's a cool thing to play with. As we get further along, we can better assess where we might want that to happen. And think about where you want people's attention to be, and add some details in those areas. It's a little too much, but I definitely want to add a bit more planar transition to this section. Yeah, exactly. A focal point. Since humans evaluate everything on a relative scale, contrast is your ultimate tool in manipulating your viewer, right? You got to think about all of the ways you can use contrast. Contrast of value, contrast of hue, saturation, granularity, all of this stuff. There's so many tools at your disposal there. At some point too, we can start to add some patterns and designs to the crown here, which I think will be fun. Some kind of a border treatment. And full disclosure, I don't approach every piece this methodically and layered. As you get more comfortable, you can omit some of these steps. You can merge some of them together, and depending on your comfortability and familiarity with the subject matter, that can also affect how you approach it. If you're really unsure about it, then maybe you go more structured or layered, approach it with a bit more caution. But if it's something you painted a million times, then you can kind of just go wild with it if you want. Here we're taking a bit of artistic license to have some of those elements bleed out, get some of that radiance. That's a bit of a stylistic choice there, but I appreciate that kind of look. adjust the levels just a bit here. Let's see. No, don't want that. Okay, it's actually reading pretty close to what I want, I think. I'll go with that. I do those checks every so often just to see, does it feel like it's jiving with the overall ambient light in the scene. And you could, of course, adjust the object, or you could adjust the environment too. Either one works. Let's see, what do I want to do with this plane here? I think it's... yeah, let's lighten that. Fudge that shadow shape there a little bit to help us feel that planar tweak on the face. I want a little contour line there to help us feel the flow of that section. All right, just playing around with darkening that there. I didn't like that. fun playing around with little subplanes now, just little extra chiseled bits. I don't care for that one quite as much. You can also sort of like smudge in on cracks to form what feels like another bevel on the surface. And then just go in and add the proper accents, and it kind of emerges pretty quickly. So you get one there. And then that bit of the nose feels like it's kind of dented in. Then go back to our last step here. We can see some interesting stuff happening there, and it's also good to see the history state so you can evaluate, you know, is it are you destroying anything that you liked from a previous step? You know, like this line was feeling really dark, so I'm gonna knock that back a little bit there. I think I was liking slightly darker shadows that I got rid of a second ago, so let's bring those back in. Now we can ensure that everything we've done is a positive change. We lost a sense of our chain there. Old necklace chain. I'm just kind of messing around with subdividing the forms, adding a bit of visual interest, changing the proportional feeling of these areas. Yeah, certainly you could go in and use some photo textures if you wanted in this phase. Certainly there's a lot of people who take shortcuts like that. I kind of have fun painting some of these things in myself, but you have to consider your time constraints too, of course. Sometimes you just don't have the time to give everything that hand painted touch. When I do have time, I really appreciate it. Okay, actually, I think we're... I didn't see the time, guys. It just disappeared on us. I was noodling away here. Alright, cool. So, I am pleased with how this is turning out. I think we're in, again, this kind of polish phase, but I think we've gotten through all of those kind of major rendering layers, and we'll kind of just noodle a bit. I may actually tinker with this a little bit off stream, just because this process here is, I mean, you could just spend an eternity if you wanted noodling on these things. You can see how we've approached it, which is the important part, but you continue to kind of refine this, bring in extra little bits of color, textural details, and then on the next stream, we'll kind of do the final pass on this, which will just essentially be adding a little bit more polish to the environment, just tuning the values there, a little bit of atmosphere, and we'll bring in some rim lighting on the left side to just have things pop a bit, and we'll likely bring in something. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. I was thinking about adding something maybe magical to this, but it feels very realistic. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how I feel. But anyways, thanks for tuning in, guys. Appreciate it. Hope you had fun and found some of the stuff interesting or informative. And there's content throughout the week here, so make sure you tune back in and check out some of the other stuff the mentors are doing here on CGS channel. But with that, I think we'll sign off. But again, thanks for watching. And if you guys are interested in taking some classes at CGS, go check out the website, cgspectrum.com. And if you're interested in seeing some of the work that I'm doing, you can find me on Instagram at Art of Ty, ARTOFTY. All right, but with that, I'll catch you guys next time. Bye-bye.